what you have done or are planning to do to pay tribute to the Queen, whether you went to the palace this weekend, whether there's an event in your community, or whether you're doing something in your household, within your family. What are you doing to mark the end of an era? And it is quite literally the end of the second Elizabethan era. So what are you doing to mark the occasion? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850, tweet at LBC. The other thing that I'm interested in is what you would like to see from King Charles III, because he was a prince for so very long, I already feel like we know more about him than we ever knew about the Queen. The Queen was quite inscrutable, wasn't she? And she was very neutral on political matters. And you don't really know what she thought about anything. I mean, sometimes she would make a kind of subtle gesture, like, for example, wearing a brooch given to her by Obama during then President Trump's visit to the UK. That was a pretty sassy thing to do. But she wasn't particularly outspoken on issues. She kept her thoughts very much to herself. Not so with King Charles. We already know how strongly he feels, for example, about environmental issues. Would you like to see him continue in this vein, particularly in light of the fact that we have a government who seems to be reneging on a lot of their promises about the environment? And what do you make of speculation, which is already rife within the newspapers, that he is going to streamline and pare down the royal family, that it's going to be a smaller and more modern monarchy under Charles? Is that something that you would welcome? The number to call is 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850, tweet at LBC. Well, we're joined now by Charles Anson, who is former press secretary to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth from 1990 to 1997. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. How will you remember her?
I will remember the Queen, having worked for her for 7 years, for the consistency and constancy of her sense of public duty. And I think that sense of public duty in bringing the nation, helping to bring the nation through a period of enormous change from the Second World War through the massive developments of the second half of the 20th century and into a rather more uncertain world now. And I think the Queen, as being a steadying figure throughout that period, not being involved in politics, but certainly underscoring and supporting ideas of a more tolerant society, a more racially integrated society, one that is devoted to helping those who need support and so on in their lives. So that idea of making a better society outside of politics is something that the monarchy can contribute in a way that's different from government.
And what about King Charles? How do you think his, I guess, style, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but his style of being a monarch will perhaps differ from that of his mother?
I think each monarch operates in a slightly different way, and I think the strength of the British monarchy is that it is adaptable and it is open to change. And when you look at the Queen's reign, quite a cautious start as a young queen in the aftermath of the Second World War, has actually presided over a society that's changed hugely. And she has raised children who are all very much involved in the modern issues of the day: climate change, jobs for young people, social services for those who need them, the importance of the voluntary sector. All those things have been encouraged by the monarchy in a way that has been outside of politics. So I think the contribution of a modern monarchy is actually to encourage a better society and an improvement in the quality of life and degree of tolerance and support for each other that is beyond the sort of political area of life.
And did the Queen ever give any insight into what she wanted the monarchy to look like after her reign. We've heard some speculation that it will be kind of slimmed down. Is that something that she ever spoke about?
Certainly did. I mean, during the time that I was press secretary in the 1990s, we did, with very much with the agreement of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, look at the royal finances and look at ways in which the costs of the monarchy could be more efficiently managed, whilst providing, the service to people and going around the country and receiving people at Buckingham Palace and so on. But trying to do it in a way that perhaps was more in keeping with modern times and where costs were not constrained necessarily, but kept within sort of reasonable boundaries. But I think really the work of the monarchy has been more to spread public good amongst the population as a whole. So the idea of a smaller monarchy is, I think, quite attractive in the modern age, and actually is practical, because many members of the royal family who have had children, their children don't particularly wish to be working members of the royal family. The scrutiny, the media attention, the constant sort of ability to criticise people in public life for trying to do their best and perhaps not meeting it at times, I think it's put off some people from taking public roles, and therefore, inevitably, there will be a smaller monarchy to undertake all those tasks and duties which fall beyond the sort of public pale. So the idea of patrons of charities, of championing causes to do with children and so on and so forth, is much more easily done if you have a number of members of the royal family that can take part in that. But I think it will be a smaller monarchy in terms of its costs, and I think a lot of the public think that is probably a good thing. But you can't have a monarchy that doesn't look the part. I mean, it's got to be a centre of excellence to attract the support that it's had over the centuries of being something that is representative of Britain, but also operates in a way that is financially understandable and supported by the public. It's a hereditary institution, the monarchy, but the fact is that it has to have levels of public support to be able to operate effectively. And I think this King Charles, will be a very good king in that respect, because his interests are so focused on things that matter to people in 21st century life: climate change, the environment, jobs for young people, looking after mental health, providing social services for those who can't afford them. That kind of thing needs to be championed, and that's
well, certainly somebody needs to champion those things, and our government are not doing a very good job of it right now. Charles Anson, thank you so much. Former Press Secretary to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, 1990 to 1997. The questions that I'm asking you this hour are, first of all, how have you marked the passing of Queen Elizabeth? What have you been doing with yourself this weekend? But secondly, what do you expect from King Charles III? What do you hope from King Charles III? And the number to call is 0345 6060 973. James has called from Leeds. What would you like to say?
Hello there. I must admit, I'm a Republican, so I haven't shed a tear over the Queen dying, I must admit. But I do think with Charles getting the throne, I think it puts us in quite an interesting position.
Okay.
From the point of view that we've, Charles is, of course, as the last caller said, very big on his environmental issues, saving the planet, being greener and whatnot. And we've got a Prime Minister who's recently just applied for a fracking bill. So I think it's going to be fascinating if the public are against the fracking, and you have a situation where Charles is quite vocal about his, being against that himself. I think it puts us in a fascinating position, and particularly given the fact that he's called Charles, I think makes it even more interesting, doesn't it? Is history perhaps going to repeat itself, admittedly in a less bloody way, I would hope?
Well, even if, let's say that King Charles from this day forth, never utters another public word about the environment or climate change. There's enough on record that he has said that we very clearly know what his opinions are on it. And therefore, like you say, if we have a government who, and this is something we're going to be discussing in the next hour, who wants to do more fracking, who are reneging on the green levy promises that they've made, all with the stated aim of bringing down energy bills, it's an interesting situation to be in, where you have the agenda of the king so clearly in contrast with the agenda of the government. James, thank you so much for your call and for making that point. I'm also interested in how this era, the second Elizabethan era, will be remembered throughout history. And we're joined now by Sir Anthony Selden, who is a constitutional expert, contemporary historian and political commentator. He's joining us from Buckingham Palace. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. How do you think that the reign of Elizabeth II will be remembered in history?
Well, the reign of Elizabeth will be remembered globally as an extraordinary moment in British continued history. Throughout the 20th century, in the First World War, Second World War, Britain was one of the great powers, and her monarchy and the British Empire becoming the British Commonwealth, over which she was indisputably the focal point, continued some of that aura of great power deep into the 21st century. So things will now change. In a way, it's the end of the Second World War era.
I mean, I'm looking at some of the things that have happened during the past 70 years. You've had, for example, the Equal Pay Act for the genders. You've had gay and lesbian people gaining their rights to marriage. You've had the women being able to access the pill. There are so many things that have been good for equality. And we've heard our previous speaker talk about the Queen being very committed to equality. Do you think that Charles, A, will continue in that vein, but B, will be more vocal about it? And do you think in a modern era it's more appropriate for a monarch to be vocal about these types of issues?
Oh my goodness, lots of questions there. So yeah, I mean, isn't that extraordinary, the way that she was able to go with the vast changes that you described? It's hard to imagine Queen Victoria or George V, her grandfather, bending the way that she did, doing what she did with James Bond and being into the joke. Or I mean that because it shows that there is somebody there who can take themselves lightly, laugh at themselves, understand how much the country is changing, and of course, Charles has been ahead of many people now who are championing many of the issues that he is championing. People trashed him for, and he has been proved to be right. So he has helped define many of the agendas, including community, local crafts, building up young people in a holistic way, not the obsession with exams and tests, the importance of art, the importance of culture, the importance of faith, the importance of respect for diversity.